We're coming today to Science 12, which means this is the final presentation of a 2-year cycle of 8 phases. And next week will be the 8th interval to give it an articulation, so that those of you who are not going to follow and do another cycle for yourselves will be able to then do the 9th phase, which is the complementarity phase, which you'll be able to consult in your learning civilization outline. And that 9th phase is always what we used to call in universities 40 years ago, self-study. It is something for you to do yourself in your own way and to use whatever, quote, discipline, whatever yoga you have acquired during the 2 years, the 2-year cycle, the ecology of the 2 years together, to be able to use that yourself in this 9th phase. The traditional wisdom of a 9 is that is the completion of the set of integers 1 through 9, in that in order to perfect that completed set of integers, one then goes back to the origins of the set, which are not only 1, but 1 with 0, so that one begins to realize that the set of integers 1 through 9 are kept as a set by a 0 parentheticalness, and that when one steps outside of the set of the 9 parenthetically held by the 0, one now counts the next number as 10, 1 to the next power, which would be 10 times what it is. 10 is 10 times 1. And that this is the trigger for the ordinal stepping up of the powers of making sets out of the sequences of what can be numbered, so that the next jump from 10 would be 2 zeros, which would be 100, and so these are the powers of 10. There are other ways that we know now from developments in mathematics of the last 100, 200 years. There are many ways to have powers. The quality in the ancient classical West, always that the powers of ones are held into their set by 0, but one can take the powers of 1 and prorate it so that the 1 is able to step up its powers in a spatial way by doubling, by squaring, or by the classic way in which that was expressed is in Plato's great dialogue, the Timaeus, where he takes the Greek letter lambda and shows that from 1 you can generate 2, 4, 8, and also from the 1 you can generate 3, 9, 27. The squares and the cubes, in terms of motion and space, will always resolve into a ratio of 1. This was borne out, especially in the 19th century, by the discovery that the orbits of the planets around our sun will always be in ratio of oneness, and that by multiplying the distance in space of the planet by its orbital motion, that ratio of the squares and the cubes to those dimensions will always produce a ratio which equals 1. And so while the orbits of the planets constantly enlarge the farther they get from the sun, and their space and movement that they describe, there is an order, it's called Bode's law, of where planets can maintain themselves stable in the kinetic energy of a star system. We're taking in our learning the tap root of the deepest wisdom, not of metaphysics, but of the actual maturation of our species, especially over the last 40,000 years. The problem for us is twofold. We were never taught what the lineages and the traditions were, what the histories were, what the wisdom heritage of our species was, and we were never alerted that species are mutable, that they continue to evolve, they continue, especially at the threshold of the vanguard of evolution, they continue to refine, and that our particular species, especially over the last 200 to 300 years, has been gaining momentum to do a refinement of species. Not a mutation, but a refinement. And that in our lifetimes, this has accrued enough amperage, enough pressure, that it has speeded up now to become visible in the threshold, whereas you look at young boys and girls, say 14 and under, they are already living in a realm that transcends the dimensions of what men and women were used to, especially over the last 40,000 years. Just as our distant ancestors then were markedly different from the same species that had been around for at least 120,000 years, and Homo sapiens, whose origins go back to about 160,000 years ago, refined to Homo sapiens sapiens 40,000 years ago. They became wise about being wise. We are at the cusp of becoming Homo sapiens stellaris, wise hominids who live in a complete star system, for whom the interstellar reaches are the backyard and front yard of adventures, and that the overwhelming context of inspiration is of a galactic structure, and one might call this the spiral spirit. And one sees more and more the cognizance that a spiral spirit, guardian, teacher, quality exudes in higher dimensions than the four of space-time, a creative, imaginative quality, and a remembering quality that goes deeper and deeper, so that past, present, and future dissolve as mental conceptions in a continuum, in a continuity that is not only a flow, but is at the same time a field. This field is the field of differential consciousness, mirroring the field of integral nature in such a way that the complementarity of those two fields together allows for this refinement of maturation to star wisdom human beings. Not only for our planet in our star system, but it is deeply ingrained in the way in which the universe matures into a cosmos each time that a star system is able to develop in this way. And so any civilizations that we meet on the interstellar freeways and highways and byways will be star system civilizations. One way to understand this is to take a look at Penrose-Wang tilings. These are mathematical forms that are generated, and I'll make this available so you can check out the website. We're taking Roger Penrose along with Stephen Hawking and pairing them with Richard Feynman as our final pair for the square of the final 4 presentations of the 8th phase science, so that we're consistently using a pairing quality like a tuning fork, and we're applying a kind of a methodological combing, not a combing out of snarls like in the hair, but a combing out of a chaotic mash of noise, so that we are able to hear language which is able to convey and express increasingly the refinements of what is real. This tuning is not just a tuning fork used over and over again, but there is a graduated set of tuning forks, which anyone who has ever seen a piano tuner will recognize is how you make the instrument capable of playing music in tune and to follow compositions no matter what scale they are composed in. The instrument, the piano in this case, will be in tune. We have a set of pairs that are put into triplets. And so we square what used to be a book by using a pair of books, and we cube it by using a triplet of those pairs for each phase, so that 8 phases times the 3 will give us 24 pairs. And those 24 pairs of tuning forks are able to tune the very sophisticated instrument that we are as a conscious, living being capable of inhabiting not only a star system, but of exploring a galactic reach, and of comprehending and understanding not only the universe as a one place, but the cosmos as an infinite, all possible worlds. The description that immediately follows on Penrose-Wang tilings reads, recall that the dual polytope of the 600 vertex 120 cell 4-dimensional hypododecahedron, and they're talking about angles, and they're talking about dimensional facets. The golden ratio on edges of a 4-dimensional 24 cell, and if the rational points of the 4-dimensional space are taken to be a 4-dimensional subspace spanned by the 4 dimensions, in the 8-dimensional octonian space with a basis of then 8 coordinate dimensions, and the irrational golden ratio phi equals then the 4-dimensional subspace, and the 120 vertices of the 600 cell generate an E8 lattice, an 8-dimensional octagonic space. What our presentation over 2 years does is to patiently take us through a 24 tuning fork, not a progression so much, but really a maturation. And as we do, the recalibration begins to accumulate, and the ancient name for this translates into English as the storehouse consciousness. The Jungian term of the collective unconscious is very nice in some respects and very unnice in others. There is no unconscious. The storehouse consciousness, in Sanskrit, it's called alayana vijnana, and it is the reserve that is increasingly tapped, and as it is tapped, it gushes like a fountain and gives its reserve more and more completely, so that the blossoming will eventually accept the entire storehouse consciousness, and one will be cosmically alert and enlightened, having left nothing unconscious, brought everything forth into living perspective, into a vibrant conscious nature, and that this is transmissible. Our 8 phases are like the Noble Eightfold Paths of classical Buddhism. We have a quality that is also very much like the ancient Hermetic wisdom. One of the rarest of all the Hermetic treatises was found with the Nag Hammadi manuscripts, codexes in 1940, about the time of just a few years before the Dead Sea Scrolls. And one of those treatises was the 8th reveals the 9th. And the saying in that 8th reveals the 9th is that those who achieve the 9th are able to hear the silence of the 10th. And in that silence of the 10th, what they sing is a celestial music which reverberates everywhere, because the silence of the 10th allows for an articulation of what those in the 9th are singing to be heard everywhere. And the vibronic quality that is generated by their 9th singing in the 10th space generates the field of nature. And so nature is renewed constantly, eternally, by those able to mature into the community of the blessed, who are able to sing together for real. And that all of this happens not once as a big bang, but consistently in continuums that are blazingly astounding in the expansiveness that they transcend time, they transcend space, in such a way that someone like Penrose and Hawking and Feynman, and we began science with a pair, Einstein and Bohr, and we put 2 great 20th century women scientists right in the middle, Barbara McClintock, who found that genes jump around all the time, and that as transposons, that's how life becomes creative to deal with all of the challenges, many of them new, that constantly occur, and that one doesn't follow an old recipe book so much as one recreates the gene structure originally to deal with the actuality that the life form is encountering. And the other was Vera Rubin, who's the one who discovered that dark matter is by far the major constituent, not only of the universe, but is sourced in dark energy, and that it is not apparent on local levels to see this. You have to transcend millions of galaxies wide to be able to notice that they cluster and move, not just drifting, but that they have their own cycles, and that on these very large scales of the universe, it's apparent that there is not enough visible matter in the universe to hold it together. So there must be a gravitational effect of matter that is not visible and sourcing in an energy that is not visible, because it is not in the electromagnetic spectrum. It is rather in the complement of the electromagnetic spectrum, which is the magnetoelectric spectrum, whose frequencies are about 20 billion times those of the electromagnetic spectrum. So that someone, as a spirit being, living in the magnetoelectric dimensions of the cosmos, would be able to take one giant step and step through our so-called Big Bang universe without touching a single atom and without moving more than just one step. So that we are maturing ourselves to a cosmos that is astounding in every way, and which is incumbent upon us to recalibrate ourselves out of the selfish sandboxes of metaphysical nightmares back into the light. One of the qualities that distinguishes Stephen Hawking is that he constantly is going back again and again to recover the history of physics. His latest book is on Einstein, The Essential Scientific Works of Einstein, A Stubbornly Persistent Illusion. Einstein, in one of his writings, said the idea of a past, present, and future of time is a stubbornly persistent illusion. Time is not the arbiter of reality, nor is space the proctor of what is possible. Time and space are dimensions of a visible 4% of the universe, and there is a great deal more. One of the earliest presentations of Hawking, going back to trace the histories of science, because science must come out, it blossoms as a special form out of what history is in its flow. And we've seen that history is a kaleidoscopic consciousness. It is not a chronology of dead facts. The quippers who say, that's over your history, as if you're dead and gone. The only thing dead and gone there is that dead-end opinion and that metaphysic. History is a complex, multiple flow, constantly expanding, of kaleidoscopic consciousness that comes forth from the prism of the spiritual person who has achieved a six-dimensional quality of their lives and of their remembrance and of their creativity. And they have emerged as if they were born again, not out of a doctrine, not out of beliefs, but out of a five-dimensional field of differential consciousness, which in itself is only possible to discover that one is free in this field by making the symbols of the mind transparent. And it's only with the transparent mind that our higher tutorial spirit quality can reach through the frame of the mind and pull us free out of the limitations of that frame of reference, out of the veil of images and of memories and of doctrines and of ideas which increasingly, as they become more and more transparent, the invisible so-called realm becomes real enough to help our spirit tutorial quality pull us through from the mind that was a limitation to a mind that is like a doorway through which we now emerge increasingly into freedom. The quality of that larger dimensionality was always called in the West a harmonic. And Stephen Hawking, in his early book On the Shoulders of Giants, took 5 great scientists. One of them was Einstein, another was Newton. One of them was Johannes Kepler. And the publishers took the selection of each of the 5 scientists from Hawking's earlier book and put them out in paperback by themselves. This is Harmonies of the World, Book 5 by Johannes Kepler. And the other scientists are Copernicus, Galileo, Newton, and Einstein. With Kepler, one reaches the initial threshold of the way in which science, for the first time since antiquity, was able to step forth into a freedom of understanding that had been imposed at that time for about 1,300 years. If one looks at the great books of the Western World series, you will find Ptolemy, Copernicus, and Kepler. You will find Ptolemy, who goes back to the classical way in which the universe was put together in the 2nd century AD, to Copernicus, who made the first improvement on that Ptolemaic universe, that the universe is not Earth-centered, but sun-centered. And finally, Kepler, the selection is the epitome of Copernican astronomy, which is an unfortunate selection because he is not about Copernicus. He is about Kepler, completely new. And one of the qualities of Kepler, his mother was accused of witchcraft because someone who is completely new, like Kepler, is always sabotaged by enemies. They couldn't sabotage him because he was one of these incredible figures, enormously connected and linked and high quality, so they tried to get to him through his mother. One of the qualities of Kepler is that one of his little-known monographs is on the 6-cornered snowflake. The 6-cornered snowflake is extraordinary because it is a very simple geometry, which is obviously universal. But each snowflake is individual and unique. No 2 snowflakes are ever alike, nor will they ever be alike. If you've been in a wet winter blizzard, you know how many snowflakes there are in just 1 hour of standing there, like Thoreau being a surveyor in the snowstorm, to share the snowstorm with the trees. Every snowstorm that has ever taken place on this planet, or will ever take place, on this planet or any other planet or any other moons, will always be individual. It will have its own architecture. One of the qualities of this is that the cover of one of the most important books in the 20th century, Hermann Weyl's book on symmetry, has a Keplerian snowflake embossed on the cover, published by Princeton University Press. Because at the time, Weyl, who was one of the great founders of group theory and mathematics, among other things, was at the time at the Institute of Advanced Studies at Princeton. And here's a photo And in the photo, one sees this very tall figure in the back here. This is Hermann Weyl. The figure here on the side is a great physicist, Eugene Wigner. Next to him is a great mathematician whose name is Kurt Gödel. And next to him is a Nobel Prize-winning physicist, I. Rabi. Next to him is Albert Einstein. And over on the far side is J. Robert Oppenheimer. So that you have here 6 of the greatest makers of modern science at one time in one room. And they are used as an illustration for Roger Penrose's book, The Road to Reality, in a book club. Because it is here in Penrose's The Road to Reality that he is able to describe it as a complete guide to the laws of the universe. The universe can have complete laws that are presentable. The cosmos cannot, because the cosmos is alive and evolving and maturing, and that we have an active part in the creativity of it, in the remembering of it, in the expansion of the differential conscious field to the kaleidoscopic conscious flow. It is our generating through the prisms of our persons as a community on the planet and soon the star system to generate a historical flow that is able to be the river out of which the cosmos is rejuvenated. The Road to Reality is almost 1,100 pages. In The Road to Reality, one of the earliest illustrations out of nearly 400, figure 1.3, is a little drawing by Penrose of 3 realms. One of the realms is entitled the physical world. The other little sphere is called the mental world. And the third up above is Plato's mathematical world. And the caption is 3 worlds, the Platonic mathematical, the physical, and the mental, and the 3 profound mysteries and the connections between them. So that at the beginning of The Road to Reality, Penrose goes back to the Platonic forms of mathematics. But Plato learned his maturation from Socrates. And Socrates learned his maturation from a woman named Diotima of Mantinea. You can read it in Plato's Symposium. Because it is the harmonics of love which has the complementarity fertile enough so that the remembering and the creativity can be synergized and bequeathed and passed on in the fertility, so that whatever is seeded by the fertility will be able to grow in life and recover through the blossoming of their maturity all of the remembrance, all of the creativity, and pass that on to their children, to their next generation. So that it is an ongoing continuum of a flow, generational, and of a field, communal. And it is this quality that Diotima learned from her teacher, who was Pythagoras. And it is Pythagoras that Penrose originally goes to. It is not that the world is just made up of numbers, but that numbers have a particularly revelatory quality. They not only are themselves, but they are also in a definite sequence, and that sequence has ways of being folded, like taking 2 whole numbers and making a ratio between them, so that 1/2 is not only a half of 1, but 1 to 2 is a living ratio. and has its own vibratory capacity to index a harmonic. Just the same, 2 to 3 or 3 to 4 or 4/4 time. The musical quality of the sphericality of the relationalities is a harmonic which is not only indexable by the whole numbers, but the folded pairs of those numbers will give you a sense of proportion. And it is the proportionality that is the ratio of the rational mind. The rational mind originally is not rational because you egg crate it into rationalism, but that you ratio it into proportions which deliver for you the sense of the music of life, that it is real in this way. One of the deepest qualities of Pythagoras was to leave pithy little statements. They rarely ever mentioned the name Pythagoras because he was so honored. They just said of these statements, ipsa dixit, he said. He said geometry is history. That when you understand the unfolding of geometry, one begins to understand the kaleidoscopic possibilities of historical consciousness. The very first book on geometry by Euclid in Alexandria, 300 BC, begins, a point is a locus of no dimensions. 0 dimensions. It's not a point. It's a locus of no dimensions. And when the locus of no dimensions moves, it describes a line. If you have 2 points that parenthetically cut the line, now the points are as phenomenally real as the line between those 2 points. But they have all emerged fresh as lines without end and points with no dimensions. But they're able to transform and stabilize themselves in parenthetical presentations of time and of space. And in this way, we are able to teach ourselves how to deal with a phenomenal world and not get lost in it. And that's why wisdom teachers are constantly putting little triggers of conundrums and puzzles and riddles and so forth, so you do not get lost in the forest for the trees. And you remember how to get out and get home. The ancient hunting technique is very simple. No matter where you are, no matter how lost you are, in anything, if you move a little bit around one way and come back and then move exactly mirror to it the other way and come back and continue that butterfly effect, you will eventually learn the terrain in a way that you have now indexed it originally from before its scratch, from its zeroness. If you take a chaotic movement and run it long enough, fast enough, it will generate a double attractor butterfly effect, and you will find the infinity sign like an ancient hermetic beacon. And you will know that you have now understood that where you are is where you will say you are, and it will go by that name. Let's take a break. Let's come back to our final presentation, except for next week's interval 8. We're tuning, and we're carrying the tuning by pairs consistently through, so that a symmetry characterizes the progression, the flow, for the first year, But in the second year, the tuning, instead of combing out the flow, makes patterned in an open way the field. So our 2 years are related together. The integral year has a particular flow to it. The differential year has a particular field to it. The ancient way of expressing it was like this, which is a magical presentation that has its origins that go back to Central Asia, about 2000 BC, the time of Zarathustra, the original time of Zarathustra. In a way, one has the moon, which can be seen in all of its different phases, but it is also phases that are within the moon, as it is, whereas the sun is radiantly always beyond what it is. One only with impunity looks to see the sun disk. You will go blind quickly. You will sear your retina. Whereas the moon, you have to continually look at through its phases. And if you look at it through its phases, while it is quartered, the new moon, the first crescent, the half moon, the full moon, there is a fifth phase, which is the gibbous, which is the decline from the full moon. And the gibbous moon is where the crescent moon is now the crescent of darkness on the moon, going back to the new moon again. So that in a very real way, there is a particular quality to cycling in nature that is observable patiently and accumulates, and the ancient word for that translated into English is accumulated penetration. What is accumulated in the penetration is to be able to delve into something, to auger into something, and it isn't just fighter pilot talk of augering in, but the auger is the ancient way. An augur is one who looks at nature in terms of a pattern which could be interpreted. But in the ancient wisdom, the augurs reported what they saw as the pattern, and the interpretation was made by someone completely different. The augurs did not make the interpretation. And so the prophetic quality of wisdom was to interpret what the augurs have seen. And in a way, the first year of our learning is all about the auguring of what is there naturally and the whole cycle of nature. And the second year is the interpretive radiance of what it means, and increasingly pulling what it means out from the auguring limitations. And the auguring limitations will always be ultimately that the cycle of nature is completed. And human beings who accept that nature now has been completed, accept that it's been completed in their mind, in mentality. And so the mind becomes the ultimate ending. It's the period to the cycle of nature in its full integral. One has understood, that's it. Whereas the wisdom is always that that is not it. You have only observed in your limitation a special case of a whole range that exceeds your ability to assign cases. And so part of the difficulty of teaching a wisdom is to set up a circumstance where those learning will, in their own way, come to a penetration through their limitations. One of the wisest ways of saying this, Martin Buber one time said, everyone must come out of their exile in their own way. Our exile is that we have settled for the certainty of our minds and what we can ascertain as completed. And the referential for that will always be to physical existence and to the flow of experience that is generated by physical existence in its actions, in its existential things and stuff. And the integral of that action and those things and this experience will come to the mind's conception of itself as having arrived and being there. The Victorian statement was, Mr. Darwin may be right about evolution, but not for us. We have crawled ashore. We're no longer available for the change of others. And of course, their existential tenure socially was very limited and abruptly brought to a complete end. What we are facing now is an abrupt, complete end to all dead-end mentalities for a very good reason. None of them will ever work again. Their whole time period is long since gone. There is no time for them to occur in any longer. The space that they occurred in is morphed to so many dimensions by now that it just will never occur again. Only in a delusionary regression will one be able to pretend that you are living again in terms that those who came before lived in. The younger ones already know that this is not true, and it's not been true for some good long while. One of the most peculiar qualities modern science, from a physicist named Bose and from Einstein, found that there is a Bose-Einstein concentrate, a BEC, state in atomic and molecular physics, very, very low temperature. And the description is a Bose-Einstein condensation is a phase transition in which a macroscopic number of particles all go into the same quantum state. Trillions and trillions of atoms or molecules achieve a unity of a oneness. So that one later has textbooks like Principles of Condensed Matter Physics. Things are not just what they seem. What they seem is such a minuscule, particular case compared to the unlimited spectrum of what they might be, of what they could be. And so the delusion becomes a funnel of narrower and narrower imprisonment. And the first peripherals to suffer from this are creative imagination and remembering. So that forgetfulness is multiplied in a sociological way as if the society, they do not remember increasingly anything. They only know what is happening and try to get with what is happening so that they can live for real. Do they? Is not ISIS. There is no way that Britney Spears' younger sister is a Cleopatra. We're looking at a peculiar time threshold that has been triggered enormously, especially in the last 300 years, and increasing so that it is not a volcanic, apocalyptic development that is occurring, but rather it is a super celestial flow of remembrance and of creativity, of creative imagining, that, like a happy tsunami, is now vibrating and freshening this whole star system. And we have a peculiar set of 3 space missions, all happening at the same time, that will come to fruition by 2015. We have the Messenger going to Mercury. Mercury is the Latin name for planet Hermes. Hermes the Messenger. And it will arrive at Messenger about the same time that the New Dawn will arrive at the asteroid belt to Ceres. Ceres, of course, is the Latin name for Demeter. So at the same time as the first space launch to the planet Mercury, the only one previous to it was Mariner 10, long time ago. Messenger will, for the first time, be there at Hermes. New Dawn will be at Ceres, Demeter's planet, and New Horizons will be at Pluto, which, of course, is the mythological figure that married Demeter's Persephone. And that Demeter and Persephone and Pluto were all involved in the Eleusinian mysteries, which the psychopomp for those was Mercury, was Hermes. And so the middle of the star system, the beginnings of the star system in terms of planets, and the farthest star system in terms of planets, but the beginning of the Kuiper belt, which is the great, big, huge version of the asteroid belt, all will occur about the same time within a year or so of each other, around 2015. This is a threshold that blossoms and opens up for the first time since Voyager 2, after reconnoitering in 1989 with Neptune and its great system, the large moon Triton among them, one of the most interesting. And Voyager 2, a couple of years later, was directed by JPL here in the Los Angeles area to turn its cameras back and take a family photo of the whole star system for the first time. All the planets, because Pluto was not yet so far out as to be way beyond Neptune, and so Voyager 2 in 1992 was able to take a family photo of the entire star system as far as we knew it then, and you could see in the pattern of the stars, of the planets, and our sun by 1992 that an entire aeon had had its turn. Aeons are time forms of pairs of millennia. And every 2,000 years, like a tuning fork using millennia as the forks, an aeon will tune. And when you have a cycle of the tuned aeons reaching 12 tuned aeons will make the beginnings of a Platonic great year, which is the time form of the largest form that we had been able to keep track of before the late 20th century, of what happens to the actual existential celestial objects that make up our star system in their complete cycle of a rotation. We have since refined and deepened our sense to almost ancient Hindu qualities of being able to tell time cycles in billions of years, not just 25,000 years, billions of years. It is this quality of scale which the new aeon has as its field of consciousness. And those who have matured in this have contributed to a whole population who are prismatically able to engender an actual kaleidoscopic history rich enough now to re-emerge the cosmos in its infinite freshness again, and in doing so, provide the generator for the way in which the field of nature is released with all the wonderful bouquet and perfuming and gorgeousness of this larger garden. No longer a garden of an Eden, but a whole star system of many gardens, of Edens that are of future and of presence rather than of a past and a singularity, moving away from an aeon where the threat of an apocalyptic end, like an apocalyptic beginning, being thrown out of Eden and coming to the last judgment, being birthed in the Big Bang and coming to the Big Crunch, that we now live in a new time form where the time element is infinite and not limited to movement of things, not limited to being able to count in a cardinal way limited numbers that can be arranged in some kind of a line, and to extend it beyond our patience, we put three little ellipses, three little dots, saying, and at the end of this will be the nth number, whatever that is. That kind of an abstraction is a convenient way of letting yourself not be wise about being wise, and especially of not achieving star wisdom humanity, which is not only our birthright, but has been earned creatively and remembrantly. We're taking Penrose today, especially. A lot of his publications are technical. This is from the Conference Board of the Mathematical Sciences, National Science Foundation, Techniques of Differential Topology and Relativity, or a world standard 2-volume textbook published by Cambridge University Press. One opens it up, Cambridge Monographs on Mathematical Physics. Volume 1, 2-spinner calculus and relativistic fields, spinners in space-time. And Volume 2 is Spinners in Space-Time, Spinner and Twister Methods in Space-Time Geometry, published by Cambridge University Press. But in order to, at the same time, alert a star system population, Penrose has written several extremely interesting, popular. This book is The Emperor's New Mind, concerning computers, minds, and the laws of physics. The emperor's new mind, of course, refers to the emperor has no clothes. Everyone is so afraid to say so. No one tells him, but the emperor has no clothes. Another, shadows of the mind. A search for the missing science of consciousness. To limit the mind so that its referentiality for meaning and for understanding is to things. The things then will be existential, and what is reflected in the mind will be reflections. But the reflections, because they are not by the light of actuality, occur as shadows. The shadows in the mind is one of the most ancient ways of Homo sapiens sapiens of telling each other to not be afraid and to endure in your penetration, to accumulate, that these are shadows of actualities, but that there are deeper realities that these actualities are shadows of. The classic case for the last 2,500 years is in Plato's great dialogue, The Republic, the myth of the cave. We are in a cave underground. We are seated and we are captive, tied to benches, watching the wall of the cave, and behind us is a great fire, and in between the great fire and us, captive, looking at the wall, various figures of cutouts are paraded, and they cast shadows on the cave wall, and we think that we're the wisest if we can identify the most of these shadows the quickest. None of us have ever seen the light. It is necessary for a sequence of transforms to happen. The first one is to be able to turn around and see that these are cutout figures being carried in front of a campfire, and that we're in a cave underground, and that these are just shadows of cutouts. The turning around in Greek is named metanoia. Meta, beyond, noia, mind. You have to be able to turn around in your mind, which means now that you do not see in a focused way of objects out there, but you turn around in your mind so that you see with the other side of the cone of light. Instead of at the focus of something existential, you start from the existentiality of the seer and you open out. And the farther one can see, the more that the cone of this inner light opens out, and you begin to be able to see allness. Not only wholeness and the implicate order, but the allness of the context of articulation within which wholeness is able to achieve a form, but that the form has a mobile freedom within a larger articulate dimension, a spiritual space, so that the inner seeing is a singular eye, which now, when it looks out at the world, sees not in terms of the existentiality, but sees through, and it makes the things of the world of appearances transparent, so that one now is able to penetratively see through all things. And in doing so, one recognizes, through remembering and creative imagination, that what was the largest scope within is also there, like an hourglass, the largest scope without. And that there must be a secret ecology of these larger scopes that not only are a oneness where we are, but are an infiniteness where their larger scopes open indefinitely. And that in order to be balanced, paired with the infinity, our oneness must be returned back to zero. We must vanish like a magic show the delusion that oneness is the origin, oneness is the emergence, but zeroness is the presence. And when that zeroness is recognized and realized, it tunes instantly to the infinity. And the binary now is not the 0 and the 1, but 0 and infinity. And that binary is not a binary, but it is a pairing. And now, instead of having a binary of opposites or duality or any of the two-nesses, there is another dimensionality to twoing, and that is pairing. Now you have something that is essayable for the first time. There is such a thing of two coming together in such a way that their oneness is resonant with infinity. Because the two-ness that becomes the oneness is able for that tuning of the two that became one to return both instantly together back to that zero and that infinite. And in this way, one begins to understand that any number of ones, not just two ones, can do this, but that unlimited communities are able to come together in this way and achieve together in this way their complete transparency and to find a harmonic with the cosmos. This is ancient wisdom all over the planet, in every star system, as far as galaxies occur. Beings like ourselves come together to refine patiently in such a way that the numbers fold into ratios, the ratios tune and expand into the music by which we can take our language and our voices, our dancing and our ordinate expressions of body and costume, mask and person, and achieve a quality which has a peculiar development in our time. Instead of being limited to a universe that has particles, we may now have a cosmos that has sparticles. They're not constituted by electromagnetic phenomena like electrons in electronics, or protons, neutrons as nucleus of the atoms, but spin particles, sparticles, are generated by the rotation of the atoms themselves, which is a chirality. They can have a rotation of +1 or -1, or +1/2 or -1/2, or have a spin of perfect zero. The quality of spin, this story is beautifully told, the story of spin by Shinichiro Tominaga, who won the Nobel Prize for Physics along with Julian Swinger and Richard Feynman, who were paired with Hawking's and Penrose. The quality of spin is one of three qualities that are pairable in terms of existential physical actuality. One, of course, is electrical parity, plus and minus. The second is spin in terms of its chirality, left or right. And the third is a quality found here in Los Angeles at Caltech by Murray Gell-Mann and some of his co-workers. It's a quality called strangeness, which are whole new dimensions that occur when one is able to go down to the level of quarks. This opening constantly and consistently of not just new dimensions and new facets of the universe into a cosmos, but it opens us from a mentality, no matter how previously solid it was or seemingly large that it is infinitesimal compared to the gorgeous array which we can indeed be. But we must become that through creative imagination, through remembering, through sourcing ourselves at as much in the differential field of consciousness as in the integral field of nature. And when they are brought together, they work together like a prayer that generates a blessing. The phrase in Islam is always God willing. In the new aeon, the refinement of that phrase is God blessing. We will do this, God blessing. One of the deepest qualities of modern physics and achievement in the world is coming because one has now figures from outside of Europe completely, from outside of the Far East completely. The Nature is the International Weekly Journal of Science. The newsmaker of the year for them is Rajendra Pachauri, chair of the IPCC. And when you turn to the article about it, you realize that they're talking about here the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And the lead editorial in Nature is about it. And immediately, as one turns through Nature, you find a couple of interesting articles. One, the demise of the lone author. Almost never do you see a single name on a scientific article any longer. Sometimes there are as many as 50 authors, male and female, East, West, and Middle East. And it is not only the demise of the lone author, but on the next page, News and Views, a quantum less quirky, the development. What physicists want for Christmas is a solution to the philosophic conundrums of quantum mechanics. They will be disappointed. But work that dissolves one aspect of quantum weirdness is some constellation. Mathematically speaking, quantum mechanics is a strange beast. The states of particles, such as electrons, correspond to functions or vectors in a complex vector space. A direction, a dimensionality of the space, the momentum of it. Physical transformations, an electron hopping from place to place, for example, correspond to linear operations or matrices acting on those functions and vectors. A flow or a field. And that flows and fields are both processes, and that the processes are triggered by forms. And not only do the forms trigger a process, but the forms originally emerge out of a previous process. So that forms will come out of a process and generate another process. The forms generate themselves so that flows occur, but they emerge out of fields. And so the field process will emerge forms that generate the flows that create the ability for forms to either come together integrally or to expand themselves infinitely differentially. Our 8 phases are like this. The first field is nature. But what emerges out of nature are the ritual existentiality of things and their actions. That's the geometry. The nature is Tao, but the things are Te. They are unified. They are this line beginning and ending here and having a middle somewhere. And as soon as you have that existential limitation of the line and the 2 points and the middle point, now you have the basis of the whole mythos of experience. Experience will have a beginning, it'll have a middle, it'll have an end. The next will be a different myth, will be a different ritual, will be a different flow of process that will have its health because it relates back to the field. Our experience is whole when we are flowing within the field of nature, and the things and their actions are a true bridge between the two. In consciousness, the field is the differential vision, and the flow is the kaleidoscopic history. And if history as a kaleidoscopic flow is not at home in the differential conscious field of vision, then theory will have no relation whatsoever as a context for the historical development. And by not knowing the historical development in its theoretical field of openness and freedom, one will never be able to have a history of science. We'll never be able to have a furthering of science because an analytic is very related to the critique of works of art. And among the works of art are the achievement of the spiritual person. The critique of art and the analytic of science are related together through the kaleidoscopic flow of history, which is generated by the art of the person making. In a very real way, the first Nobel Prize winner as an Arab is from Alexandria, Egypt, Ahmad Zewail. His biography is Voyage Through Time. He's the one that developed femtochemistry, the ability to have a chemistry based on the actual existential movements of molecular actions. A femtosecond is a trillionth of a billionth of a second. We now have attochemistry, which is on the atomic level, which is a trillionth of a trillionth. Not only Ahmad Zewail, but at the same time, the host for Stephen Hawking and Roger Penrose in their great debate, The Nature of Space and Time, whose book we have paired with Richard Feynman's QED. The host for that was Michael Atiyah. And Sir Michael Atiyah is Lebanese and European, and one of his great books is The Geometry and Dynamics of Magnetic Monopoles. You can buy on the web if you can find it. Here's a copy of this book selling for $279 plus postage. Because a magnetic monopole means that the current of the magnetism has one pole here where you can see it and have it existentially, but the other pole is out in the, I think we mentioned in the first part of today's presentation, the alaya vijnana, the so-called collective unconscious, which is really a storehouse consciousness. The other magnetic pole is out not in existential astronomical space, but in a supercelestial way. It sources a whole other area of the magnetoelectric universe. It's very easy to do. If you take a container of water, ordinary water, and you set it into magnetite, you can take a paint can and a couple of pounds of magnetite and set your water in. The water will pranize magnetically and become vibrant and alive. If you water flowers with it, they will grow 3 or 4 times the size. If you drink it, you will find a vitalization. The prana is the way in which the ancient yoga used to talk about the yogic power of language. In the Yoga Sutra of Patanjali, pranama is uttering through your breath a name which you give, and physical reality will transform, however slightly, initially with that. And so one, by naming things, they become referentially what one has named. Now it's not just magic or Adam, Eden talk, or just utter astounding magic, but one for the first time understands the transforming dimensions of a poetic. A rhetoric is a language that can convince you by argument. A poetic is one that can have you stand up and join the singing and the choiring, by which all the stars move forever as far as we can see. Next week we're taking one of the earliest of the Prajna Paramita, the perfection of wisdom, writings. It came out at the time in which the Mahayana was born in India, triggered by the arrival of St. Thomas in southern India. And St. Thomas taught an Indian guru, a Hindu named Parshva. And Parshva, as a Buddhist, realized that there was a transform that was available, that was not there except as a hint in classical Buddhism, and brought the transformation into a teaching to a wonderful young man named Ashvaghosha. His name in Sanskrit means the horse neighing. When the healthy stallion or mare whinnies, it is a sign of fantastic vitality of freedom. And Ashvaghosha is the founder of the Mahayana. And in the awakening of faith in the Mahayana, faith in Sanskrit is Shraddha, and the word used in the title of his work is Shraddhapada, which means not faith as a thing, but faith as a path. Pada is a path. If you move the vectoring of your integral on the path of faith in an awakening way, the Mahayana bouquets, and the Buddha becomes bodhisattvas. And the way of the bodhisattva is what we'll talk about at the end next week for our 8th interval. It's a very rare manuscript. It was forgotten for almost a millennia, and translated and brought back into the concourse of the world for very few people who have copies of it. I have an original copy published in India by Edward Kanzi, who is not a Buddhist, but who is one of the great Buddhist scholars and translators. He called himself a Gnostic, and his own biography was Memoirs of a Gnostic, that he just didn't believe other people, but it was such a democratic unbelief that it included all other people. He didn't believe anyone, including himself, and so he was free to learn. And in this way, he backed into enlightenment. That can happen next week.